this guy said, we're looking for people who have absolutely no experience in television, which I was like, wow. I said, they didn't even have television where I've been living. I mean, I'm walking around in flip-flops and pajamas for 8 years. It was hard to believe now, but MTV was really revolutionary at the time. It was a sign of some kind of future that might be coming, this TV revolution.
This is Masters of Scale. I'm Jeff Berman, your host. This week on the show, the word legend gets thrown around a lot. In this case, we have a legend who is actually legendary. Tom Freston. Tom is a co-founder of MTV, former CEO of Viacom, and his new memoir, Unplugged, is full of wild stories and deeply meaningful lessons from his life as an unconventional CEO. This is going to be a fun one. Welcome to Masters of Scale.
Nice to be here.
Great to have you here. I was in an airport with a book that I wasn't really loving, so I popped into the airport bookstore. I saw your book. I figured I'll grab that. I'll start it on the plane. Fortunately, there was no Wi-Fi on the plane. By the time I landed on a cross-country flight, I'd nearly finished it. It is a rollicking read. And one of the things that stood out for me in reading the book was the extent to which the early part of your career was shaped by breaking rules, making new rules. And as we look at what's happening in the world today, I'm curious what your take is on what the line is between what is acceptable rule breaking and what is really reckless and dangerous rule breaking.
Well, first of all, I'm excited to hear that they were selling my book in a bookstore in the airport.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you liked it. Well, in terms of breaking rules, well, you don't want to break rules that are against the law, generally. You know, a lot of the rules that we broke, say, with MTV were like, they were more in the cultural realm. And we broke rules on a business basis. Like, at one point, we couldn't get the cable operators who were, at that point in time in the early 80s, this seems like ancient history, but they were local monopolists. We decided after a couple of years, and we only had a couple of million subscribers, we would just go over their heads. It was like, screw them. And we cranked up the I Want My MTV campaign, which to try and pull, demand right through these distributors who were largely Elvis fans, who didn't like MTV, who didn't like the idea of paying us 10 cents a month. We were just somebody who cut into their profit margins. So that was a rule broken, which was like, it was sort of not a polite thing to do in the cable business back then.
Well, and beyond that, I mean, let's go back to Hindu Kush, which, I mean, I think most people know you for MTV, such an iconic stretch of your career. But you started by building an apparel brand out of India, right? And Afghanistan. I mean, where it's not even clear what the rules were at times, right?
I wanted to live there. I had been traveling and I had developed this fascination with that part of the world. I figured, how can I afford to live here? I need to start a business because I couldn't get a job. So I started this business in the garment business, knowing nothing, never wanting to be in the garment business. But it took off like a rocket. And then at the end, there was an embargo that Jimmy Carter put down that ultimately put my company out of business.
Yeah.
No more imports from India. And I sent 3 tons of clothes to Montreal, and we smuggled them over the St. Lawrence Seaway, which was insane. I don't know what I was thinking, but I was kind of just looking for a little justice.
You had a business that was growing. You were living the entrepreneur's dream and the stories are so colorful and so vivid. And then all of a sudden, you've got a change in geopolitics. You've got a rise in tariffs. This sounds very familiar.
Yes.
And was paying attention to the news today.
I really feel for all these young importers these days who are screwed.
So what did you learn from then that would be useful for those entrepreneurs today who are dealing with the similar turmoil?
Well, I have to say all the experiences that I had. I mean, I lived 8 years in Afghanistan and India, but also we were selling clothes and I was dealing with retailers here. But a lot of the things I've learned humility. Living in that part of the world, you learn humility, and you also build up a great confidence in yourself and your ability to do things. It was like a sort of a bebop bebop business lifestyle. You would improvise, you would take chances, you would take risks, you would bet on unusual people, you would learn how to tolerate unusual people. All of this kind of came in place, and it made sort of a perfect resume for someone who was going to lead what became a cutting edge, eccentric media company.
There's so many ambitious 20-somethings who are terrified of stepping off of the well-worn path. They're kind of going through a machine of, well, it's the right college and maybe it's the right grad school or the job at the right company, and there's real fear about following something that's more of a passion or that they feel in their body. It just might be something worth trying and being a little bit more beboppy about their career. When you're talking with young people who are in that mindset, how are you helping them understand that there's another path?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a good question. And I really worry first of all, it's a tougher time for kids. You're in your 20s these days, you want to start a career, and the office culture thing has sort of collapsed, and a lot of things that maybe we knew when we were that age are sort of gone. Step off the conveyor belt and embrace some uncertainty. No one's going to miss you if you're gone for a while. You can maybe travel all around the world like I did. But I would say but travel, making that part of your, post-college experience is like the world's greatest classroom. You learn a lot about empathy. You learn a lot about your country. When you come back, you've had a better formed existence. You're probably going to be more attractive to someone who's a recruiter than someone who just went on the conveyor belt the whole time. Relax, for God's sake.
When you came back, you ultimately, as I recall it, answered an ad that wanted people to work at a fledgling TV network who had no TV experience.
Yeah, I had come back. I had built this business. It was a multi-million-dollar business. It was a big success, which I never expected, and I loved it. It crashed and burned. I'm deep in debt. I'm back in New York. All my friends, I'm now 33. All my friends have gone out and they got married. They have careers. And I said, what the hell am I going to do? I bought this book, What Color is Your Parachute? The only self-help book I've ever bought. And I've recommended it to so many people. I mean, it said that you have transferable skills. You can do a lot of different things. And by the way, you should do something that you love, because that's really what's better than that. And what do you love? So they had all these little exercises where you could evaluate your skills, look at what you like. And I came up with music. I mean, I was a music nut. So I saw this article in Billboard magazine by this guy, John Lack. He was interviewed and he was talking about, this was the start of cable TV, the cable TV networks. They had started the Movie Channel and Nickelodeon, and they had plans to start a video music channel. I said, oh God, that's a great idea. How do I get to meet this guy? So my brother, who was in the record business, knew a guy who had just gotten to work there. I got an interview. And when I went in, this guy said, well, we're looking for people who have absolutely no experience in television, which I was like, wow. I said, they didn't even have television where I've been living. I mean, I'm walking around in flip-flops and pajamas for 8 years. So everyone they hired was and had no experience. A lot of people came out of radio, came out of the music business, and Nickelodeon. They were school teachers. And that turned out to be like the brightest move. We had to think of totally new ways to do things. And there's nothing like having no money to force people to innovate. And if you're working with a group of people who are on a crusade like you are, really passionate about something, you'll figure some good things out. It was hard to believe now, but MTV was really revolutionary at the time. It was a sign of some kind of future that might be coming, this TV revolution.
Well, it's such an interesting challenge, Tom, because you're launching a television network in a world where there are rules and there are norms. How did MTV thread the needle of taking the experience and expertise of people who knew how the system worked, but the insurgent challenger mindset of the outsiders who came in with the real passion for music and for the artists and the, screw the rules. Let's not do illegal stuff necessarily, but let's do things really differently. It feels like that's a bit of a clash between mindset and culture. How'd you guys navigate that?
Well, we had to learn what the business was. And, ultimately the business of cable programming wasn't that complicated. You got to have to create 168 hours of programming a week. You're going to bounce it off a satellite that's 25,000 miles in the sky, which seemed to me like, wow, this is like outer space stuff, which gave you the ultimate scale of, you put together this thing and then it's, it has a footprint all over the United States. We hired people who knew how to do video, and we would reach out, say to NASA, we would grab a lot of footage that was available in the public domain and utilize that, like the rocket ship launches. And we got this product from the program staple at the beginning were these music videos, which already had been produced. So we were sort of like a radio station. Everybody was in their 20s but me. I was the oldest guy at 33. My boss, Bob Pittman, who's a credible character, he was like 26. He never went to college, very successful guy. I learned a lot from him. He was like a mentor to me.
What's a great lesson you learned from Bob?
The key of the business is the consumer. You have to deal with a lot of different groups, advertisers, in our case, cable operators, artists, record companies, this and that. But if you could make a connection with the consumer and know what's going on inside that consumer's head and maybe build up a research enterprise that gives you a lot of insights into what's going on and get that bond and build up some loyalty, that will allow the other things that have to happen in your business, getting distribution, getting advertisers, convincing people to do things, that will allow them to fall into place. So it's consumer first, second, and third.
Outside of a couple of years at the NFL, I have spent the entirety of my career working for effectively challenger brands, insurgent brands.
You were at MySpace for a while.
I was, and I'm very keen to talk to you about that. But one of the challenges when you're scaling an organization that is a challenger brand and has that insurgent's mindset is how you keep that culture while you grow. It's really not hard when you're 5 or 10 or even 20 or 30 people. You get to 100, 200, 300, and you start to have things literally called divisions, right? You're separating the company. How were you all able to maintain the culture at MTV through that scaling journey?
Yeah, that was a huge challenge, particularly because we wanted to stay sort of on this cutting edge. So the first thing, I always thought that having a creative, innovative corporate culture, I almost hate to use the word corporate, would be a big competitive advantage. We needed to be diverse, which was not something that happened right out of the box. I mean, we started as a lot of like white guys. Diversity actually came our way, and it was more challenging than I thought it would be, but we were able to pull that off. And you want a place where people think their opinions get heard, that politics aren't really important, and organizations sort of flat. I would always go out and speak to them and try and reinforce the company values. And, we're a creative organization. It's okay to take risks. We encourage you to take risks. We tolerate that. We want people to be collegial. And I wanted to have a fun vibe, so we always had parties and get-togethers and socially. A lot of these things don't happen anymore. I've watched sort of the disappearance of office culture in general. It's not that great with the pandemic. I mean, people lose opportunities to bump into each other, learn things by osmosis. Mentorship kind of has disappeared in a way. So I think it's sort of coming back. But it's not, I don't know if it's ever going to be like it was with people working remotely in their underwear, like from some distant location.
No, they should be working in the office in their underwear. Right. That was the MTV way.
We had the worst dressed group of people. We probably did have people in their underwear. We didn't have a dress code. That was only no frontal nudity was our rule. And at that point in time, everybody had a dress code. But I said, screw that. We're going to be an untraditional company. And I wanted the people in the company to look like the people I just saw in a subway car, young and a bit batty. The other thing is we wouldn't tolerate, bad actors. If someone hires somebody who's substandard and they don't work out, that person is likely to hire other people who are along the same lines. So you're gradually eroding your company's vibe from the inside.
Yeah. B players hire C players and A players hire A players. And it's a pretty firm rule.
By the way, I never really focused on money when I would address the company at large. I would always talk about our creative risks and so forth and leave the money stuff aside.
Well, that was one thing when you were leading and helping lead MTV. It's another thing when you're leading and helping lead Viacom itself. What was different for you going from overseeing one brand to a family of brands that have wildly different cultures?
Well, we had a family of brands in the sense we became a big cable networking operation. We had Nickelodeon, we had Comedy Central, we had VH1, we had Noggin, we had Nick Jr., we had TV Land, there's a country music television. So when I ascended to be the CEO, I became the president of Viacom, along with Les Moonves. We were like a big entertainment conglomerate. And I became co-president with Les. We got along well. You know, he had his fiefdom, I had my fiefdom. But then the digital revolution began to hit and break up this ecosystem, which we survived on the fact that we had a central operation. We were like editors. We could manage because of scarcity. We didn't have to put out a lot of things. And now all of a sudden, we've got the internet.
Hey folks, before we get to more of today's conversation, I want to share some very important news. And if you haven't been before, you may not realize quite how big it is. Masters of Scale Summit is returning to San Francisco this October 20th to 22nd, and we want you there. The stage program is iconic, the setting is truly breathtaking, but what makes this so special, it's you. The community at the Masters of Scale Summit is highly curated and quite unusual for what looks like a business and technology conference. Yes, there are founders, there are investors, there are executives of unicorns and decacorns and big public companies. But you also have artists, you have professors, authors, you have people who create culture. And it's this intersection that makes the experience truly special. You kind of have to be there to experience it for yourself. I hope you'll join us. Visit mastersofscale.com/summit. Viacom did not really make that digital leap.
Right.
It struggled to. So given that talent that was there, what stopped you from getting there on the digital side?
Well, that was, it's back to the innovator's dilemma. Like I'll just take in the case of MTV. We saw that. It wasn't like we didn't see what was coming. I mean, you have to be an idiot not to see that. And we were the canary in the coal mine. I mean, because it was teens, young adults, they were the first people to really dive into the internet and begin, moving some of their viewing time and attention over there. Now, people can upload stuff, share stuff, comment on stuff. Everybody's almost their own little broadcaster. How do we get in on this business? We don't really have the DNA to do it. So all of a sudden now we're probably going to have to buy something. We're going to have to buy something and, try and integrate that into our business. So we fooled around. We bought a bunch of small websites that were of no great consequence. But then, a couple things happened. We realized we had our eye on social media. Met with Mark Zuckerberg. I'll never forget that. Someone called me up and they said, we want you to meet this guy, Mark Zuckerberg. He's like 20 years old. He started this thing called The Facebook. Their revenue's $9 million. So Mark Zuckerberg came in and, we had seen Friendster. We'd been watching MySpace. We thought social media, this is interesting. At the time, he was debating whether or not to add, he came in flip-flops and a hoodie in February in Times Square. I remember that, at our offices. And they were debating whether to add high school students to the platform. And they had a revenue of $9 million. He had just, I think, moved to California. We offered to buy the Facebook for $1.5 billion, which was a lot for us.
Well, especially with $9 million in revenue.
Yeah, it was a lot for us, and half of that would be an earnout. So we were the first people to bid on it. And Mark Zuckerberg wanted nothing to do with it.
He's done okay.
He's done all right for himself, that young fellow. So then we looked at YouTube. YouTube was really like wow. We were the king of short form video, and here they are doing this, but it was a whole different model where anybody could upload video, anybody could comment on it and share on it. And we said, this is fantastic. So the problem was because we were a big public company, we were liable. People were uploading, episodes of our shows or Saturday Night Live, whatever. There'd be a lot of copyright stuff. And the board at Viacom viewed it sort of as a copyright infringement machine. They ultimately, after I left, sued YouTube famously for $1 billion and lost it after 10 years. And no one ever could have imagined the ecosystem that YouTube was ultimately able to put together. I think it's worth almost $600 billion today, and it's a monster. We cast our eyes on you at MySpace. So let's see what's going on over there in Santa Monica.
There's an alternate universe where you would have been my boss, Tom. And you open the book with the MySpace story and it sort of being the catalyst for leaving Viacom. Not long after you left, Oprah reached out, as she does, and asked you to help her build her company. What's a lesson you learned from working with Oprah that you haven't shared with the world before?
She's the easiest person in the world to talk to be with, and she just radiates goodwill and goodness, and we all know that. We all know Oprah. So working with her was a pleasure. Oprah had a cadre of largely women who had surrounded her and worked on her syndicated show, which was this huge business. And they knew Oprah and they knew what they wanted, and they kind of came as outsiders to Hollywood. And I helped mostly on the business side. Can we get a deal with Comcast for distribution? How do we set up some of these departments? I would work on that kind of level. So I did that for a couple of years. It was interesting.
Tom, one of the hallmarks of your career has been seeing trends before they emerge. Does what's happening with the consolidation of media and ironically then also the fragmentation of media also create lanes for innovation that is exciting?
I guess exciting? I look at the stuff. I'm always attracted to stuff around the edges, sort of out of the mainstream. So I look at the movie business and television, but I look at A24.
Mm-hmm.
They're independent. They're not owned by one of these public companies, and they've opened up a live venue space. They sell merchandise. They have great instincts and great taste, and they continually seem to pick projects that are low cost and seem to do really well at the box office. And they're doing television, and they're experimenting with, shorter form programming that could go on the internet. I said, well, they're putting together a whole new model. And I thought one of the most interesting is the idea that they have a live entertainment venue where they can also test and, sort of pilot things. And maybe they're like that. They're like a little mini conglomerate existing outside of the mainstream and, with credibility now. And, they seem to be self-financed, and Neon's another one. So I think some of these little folks are the people to keep your eye on, some of these people that might jump off YouTube. The YouTube economy is remarkable. I mean, one of the most remarkable things about YouTube is YouTube TV as an app. I don't know if you get that. And that's like everything we ever wanted.
Yeah. If you're trying to build something like this, whether it's media or in other categories, what I'm taking from what you're saying is have a point of view.
Have a point of view, and then also try and build relationships with key creative actors and talent. It's like at the center of all this change, everything is talent. And there's a lot of people today in the YouTube universe and the TikTok universe that you might be able to tap into who've been able to establish pretty amazing businesses.
Speaking of relationships with talent, you've built some pretty incredible ones. What's the secret to building and maintaining relationships with creative talent?
We have to be honest. You have to be someone that they respect, and that means they need to think that you know what you're doing. They need to think that you also are aware of what they've done in the past. I mean, we have great stories about, Jon Stewart is a perfect example. He wanted to do a show about, we had this guy, Craig Kilborn, on The Daily Show. He was sort of a middle-of-the-road, kind of a fraternity house guy, nice guy. But we gave to Jon Stewart the shot, and he said, he had worked on it with us at MTV. I want to do political satire. And, he invented fake news. He could say he was a guy, and it turned into this steamroller full of Emmys, and he's hosting the Oscars, and he hires Stephen Colbert, and he hires Samantha Bee, and he hires Stephen Carell, and he hires John Oliver, and this whole galaxy of people who they're still around today.
We talked about the extraordinary talent that you built at MTV and across Viacom. You said that it was harder to diversify MTV than you thought it would be. Why was it harder, and what ultimately worked for you?
It was harder because I thought, at one point MTV had received a lot of criticism for not airing black acts, which, fair enough in many ways. We kind of came around. We kind of made up for that, and we were the first people to kind of give hip hop, put it in the living rooms of America. I mean, BET or in radio wasn't even playing hip hop, but we were uncomfortably white. We were uncomfortably male, and tried to change that. There's a great business case for diversity. I'm really offended with this DEI thing that's going on now with the Trump administration. Like, we don't want DEI. I mean, that's just nuts. There was a business case for why DEI is a healthy thing. If you're programming, for example, to a diverse audience, why wouldn't you want to represent them? So you have a room for, opposing viewpoints on this, that, or the other thing. And plus, it's just healthier. Why do we want to just be a bunch of white guys? It doesn't make any sense to me. We ended up about 50% women managers, but it was particularly with African Americans and Hispanics. We could just hire them and have them come on staff, and then we could say, "Hey, we kind of look like that subway car that I always had in my mind. We wanted to look like." But if they didn't feel comfortable there, then they end up leaving. So I'd see they'd show me these numbers of what we have hired, and I go, "Oh, this is really good. We're making improvement here." I would actually make this a goal on people's bonus plans. Mm. So after a couple of false starts, we got better at it. We got better at trying to make the place comfortable for everybody. And, at the end of it, when I had left the company, we had achieved that. That was like in 2005, 2006. I get in the elevators and I look around and I go, yeah.
And then the corollary is you get what you measure and you get what you incentivize. I very much share your concern about the attacks on, DEI has become this like bad, acronym. And it's not clear to me. I don't mean to be obtuse, but why? Like, to your point, if we're serving diverse and representative populations, shouldn't we have teams that reflect those populations, if for no other reason? And I think there are a lot of other reasons to do this than to build the best business possible. What am I missing? Why?
Nothing.
Okay. So is this racism and sexism, or
yes,
is it something?
It's racism without the dog whistle.
As you look ahead, as we're dealing with these challenges in our country, what gives you hope?
Well, I believe in the American people. I believe this is really a dark time in many ways. I don't detect a sense of optimism anymore. And I can't believe that that's not going to be back. Despite everything that's going on in the world, many bad things, we're going to, we still have probably the best system, and we do have checks and balances that haven't been demolished. It's really demoralizing to see the level of grift and graft and how spineless certain politicians are to accede to this happening.
Well, it's not just politicians, and this is something that I can't get my head around. And as someone who spends time with, CEOs and not just, high flying private companies, but of public companies, we depend on rule of law. Rule of law is what allows business to thrive in America. When we make a contract, we know that contract is going to be enforced, and we can go to court and get a neutral ruling, and the government's not going to come after one party because one person or one company because they support the opposition party or the opposition candidate, right? They haven't kowtowed to the current president. And yet that's under attack right now. So when you're talking with business leaders, are they even thinking about this? Do they dismiss it? Do they think the threat is real?
Yeah, I think the ones I've talked to, they would say the threat is real, but a lot of people are afraid to raise their hand.
It's a collective action problem. If you go out alone, you're going to get your head chopped off.
Yeah.
So how do we solve for that?
They all feel this way, in private. Well, why don't they? But they're afraid to stand up. They've seen what has happened. When you have Tim Cook coming into the Oval Office with a gold gift for Trump. This reminds me, I spent a lot of time in third world countries, cronyism and favoritism. I mean, it's appalling. But people, think this is what you have to do to get things done in this administration, and this is what my shareholders are going to need. So they do it. And they don't want to be singled out and have their head chopped off by Trump.
This era of shareholder supremacy in running companies, this Milton Friedman concept that's not even 60 years old at this point, really minimizes stakeholders, whether that's customers and clients, that's team members, that is society at large, our nation at large. Do you see a path to elevating stakeholder interests in how companies are led? Is there a way back to a world where corporations have responsibilities that are co-equal with the shareholder responsibilities?
That's a good question. I know I'm thinking of Milton Friedman, but you're right. We have really pretty much boiled it down to the shareholder interests. And, there was a lot of time, it wasn't that long ago, when companies would do these purposeful things. And now they all got derided as, oh, this is woke stuff. Save the music, like music libraries and music, instructing kids how to play musical instruments. These are good things. It ties in with our image. And what it did was it make everybody in the company feel good. One of the things I do, and I go through this in the book, I'm the board chair of this thing called One Campaign. And part of that is RED, which is, I don't have my phone with me, but, we would partner with companies making products. And what we would find that you deal with Starbucks and others, the employees would feel good knowing that the company that they work for, that they devote their life to, is doing socially positive things as well as just marketing a product in the best way possible. So I hope it comes back. I hope we're just going through a phase. It would seem to be a lost opportunity. I think more people would be doing it if they weren't fearful that somehow it's going to be lumped into this woke category that you're going to be attacked for.
Tom, I'm very much the MTV generation. I remember Dire Straits. I remember discovering the Beastie Boys and Biggie, and I remember Remote Control. I mean, MTV was such a culture shaper for my generation. And now if you turn on MTV, it's like wall-to-wall ridiculousness reruns and what have you. And several months ago, a year ago, they stopped even really as a video channel. What is the world lost with? We gained a lot in the fragmentation to cable, but we still had sort of a monoculture.
Yeah.
What is the world lost now that we are so hyper-fragmented?
Well, outside of big sports events, or say the last episode of the Stephen Colbert Show, there's not a lot of shared moments. What we used to call in the old days, you remember, the water cooler moments, where everybody shows up, hey, did you see this thing last night on Friends? Or did you see this Unplugged on MTV with Bob Dylan? Everybody lives in these silos, and everybody is being served up things by algorithms. You do see a bit of rebellion against that now. You start seeing vinyl coming up, vinyl sales coming up. People are buying flip phones instead of smartphones. I mean, this is maybe still just a niche thing. But it says to me there's sort of an aching, and there's this great nostalgia for the 90s. But I think the disappearance of MTV and a lot of those linear networks and the big broadcast shows, just I'm not so sure it's a positive thing for the society,
I really can't recommend your book Unplugged enough. It is not only full of actionable insights and lessons, but the stories are just freaking great. If you weren't going to be my boss at MySpace, at least to have you on Masters of Scale.
We got close.
We got close. Thank you so much for being with us.
It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks again to Tom Freston for joining us. His story is a powerful reminder that truly disruptive companies cannot follow an existing playbook. For more fascinating takes from Tom's life, be sure to check out his memoir. It's called Unplugged. We'll put a link in the show notes. I'm Jeff Berman. Thank you for listening.